Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Cost of Inaction, What You Lose When You Don't Automate Your Financial Processes. My name is Mark Brousseau, President Brousseau and Associates. I'm pleased to be one of your speakers for today's webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by ActiveWorx. I'm pleased to be joined today by Stephen Pietrzak, Senior Business Development Executive for ActiveWorx, and Cheryl Girling, a Director of Enterprise Sales for Corpay. There's no question that organizations are looking for ways to do more with less these days. And a good place to start is in accounts payable. The way that most organizations go about processing invoices and paying domestic and global suppliers, well, frankly, it costs too much, it takes too long, it creates too many errors, it provides too little visibility, and it frustrates just about everybody involved in the process. Well, there's a better way, and organizations are embracing automation, but that doesn't mean everybody's automating. So today, we're going to lay out an action plan. We're going to show you why it is that your organization needs to do more than just automate. It needs to become fully automated when it comes to its invoice processing and supplier payments. Steve and Cheryl are going to join me in that discussion. So when we think about what it is that the way that most organizations are processing invoices and paying suppliers today, well, there's lots and lots of manual and semi-automated processes. Less than 1 in 5 organizations today are fully automated when it comes to their accounts payable. And by that, I mean that they have end-to-end automation and they operate in a continuous process improvement loop. So in other words, they've standardized their processes. So what happens to everyone else? Organizations that are manual and semi-automated? Well, they experience lots of delays when it comes to processing invoices and even paying suppliers. There's too much paper in the process, and so we have lost and misplaced invoices. Double entry of data, well, that's typically the norm. And all across the life cycle, we're going to have lots and lots of manual processes. Well, organizations are looking to do something about this. They want to automate. It's become the top priority of not only CFOs at a global level, but accounts payable leaders at a department level. Today, organizations are looking for ways to streamline their supplier management, to accelerate their invoice approvals, and to reduce the costs and the risks associated with paying domestic and international suppliers. Steve, what's happened over the past 2 years? Where are we today in terms of the level of appetite of organizations to automate? And what is it that's driving that?
Well, the past 2 years, as much interest as there was in automation before the pandemic hit, the immediate pivot to working from home really necessitated a lot of organizations that had to do something. Otherwise, their businesses, their supply chains, their vendors would have just shut down and been created havoc. So that really was a catalyst for the automation process, and it really enabled organizations doing. And rather than throwing a body at it that they couldn't anymore, they were putting technology and automation in the cloud into place, and that really helped exacerbate the move to where we are today to more fully automate these processes and trying to get everybody to follow along with that.
Yeah, sure. One of the most inefficient elements of the accounts payable process is when it comes to paying global suppliers. Talk to me about some of the traditional friction in that process and why it is that organizations are so keen on doing something about it now.
Well, in terms of, the traditional methods of making global payments, right? It can be a very manual process where an AP clerk is sitting at her desk creating templates. But with COVID, with us all working from home, they need increased visibility, approvals that match their internal controls. And then as well, with the traditional method where, clients are, working with regional banks, they're not sourcing liquidity themselves. Think of a client that's in Kansas, for instance, right, that needs to go to a tier one bank to purchase Thai baht, who then has to go to another counterparty. There is just an added layer of costs as well, and and many hops for a payment to land to a vendor in Thailand, which means likely the vendor or the supplier in Thailand is not receiving full value.
Yeah, and Cheryl, it's not just big companies that are keen on automating cross-border payments. Frankly, businesses of all size are looking for ways to streamline this process. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And they're looking for technology that can actually be tailored to their needs. It may not be full automation like API, but it can be, semi-automation, where they're mapping to the file of their ERP system to just, streamline that AP process a bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Steve suggested, organizations are automating. And one of the areas that they've really pushed forward is when it comes to paying their suppliers. Business to business payments, well, they were the last bastion, it seemed, of paper check payments. We were gripping those paper checks and just wouldn't let go long after consumers ditched them for electronic alternatives. That all changed back in March of 2020 when organizations could no longer get into the office to cut those paper checks. We've seen a sea change over the past 2 years in the percentage of payments that businesses make electronically to their suppliers. And that's true of domestic payments as well as global payments. And there's no let up in sight. Today, organizations recognize that when they use paper check payments to pay suppliers, well, they take a lot of time that their AP departments don't have anymore. Today, 1/3 of all AP practitioners are working longer hours as a result of the disruption caused by the move to remote working. What's more, organizations are finding that in many cases, they'd be working even longer hours if their company hadn't put a stop to overtime pay. And so this is time that organizations can't allocate staff to those strategic activities that Steve and Cheryl were talking about, things like analyzing data and collaborating with stakeholders and even building relationships with suppliers. We all know that manual processes are expensive. There's lots of hard dollar costs associated with them, and that starts with labor. 62% of the median cost of accounts payable is wrapped up in our staff. And in many cases, our staff is wasting away their days on manual repetitive tasks. 84% of the typical AP practitioner's day is spent on heads down activities like keying invoice data and check information, pushing paper, fixing errors and mistakes, responding to phone calls and emails from suppliers. And it doesn't stop there. Even AP managers spend more time every day on transaction processing than on the managerial tasks they were hired to perform, things like hiring and training staff, which is vitally important now. But it's not just labor that costs us a lot when it comes to manual AP processes. There's lots of what I'd call hidden costs as well. Missed deadlines that result in late payment penalties, missed early payment discount opportunities, supply chain disruption, even things like inefficiencies and postage costs. These are the things that organizations need to take care of as they position themselves for the economic recovery that we hope is coming. And that brings us to our first poll question, which is about to be displayed on your screen. We want to know, how would you describe your accounts payable process today? Is it manual, paper-based? Is it partially automated? You've deployed some technology, but you still have a lot of manual processes. Is it mostly automated? You've deployed some technology, but you still have some manual processes. Or is it fully automated? Electronic touch-free processing like Steve, you are living the dream. Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. So Steve, it was, if I had to wager, I'd say most folks are going to fall somewhere in the middle, right? They've
Agreed.
probably done something these days. The thing is that's not good enough anymore, is it?
It's not. And
Why?
again, any step towards automation, really it has become a requirement in today. Let's take advantage of the opportunity that's presented with us here to do a straight through process with a fully automated environment. It really is able to leverage the staff that you have in place to be more analytical and more value add, as you had alluded to. It certainly will help reduce the cost of processing those single invoices and payments. But it really does help better manage the efficiency of the organization overall. And once you've kind of embarked on that endeavor to add that automation, let's relook at your entire process that you're working with today, and make accounts payable and your payments process a more of a value add to the organization than a cost drain and an inefficiency.
Somebody listening in today who spends their day keying data and pushing paper might be skeptical of this idea of touch-free processing, Steve. What's possible? What is it that ActiveWorx clients are able to achieve?
Well, I think the critical piece is data, and you need to be able to effectively digitally capture data right out of the gate. Having your suppliers present the invoices that they need paid via a portal, which completely eliminates any sort of manual intervention from that point forward. The systems will pick that up and integrate it into a workflow process, and with rules and roles perfectly defined. You can automatically approve certain items within the parameters that you've defined there. But it also allows for the electronic capture of say a scanned paper document for those firms that a mom and pop firm that just can't really invest in the automation that's required. If you have a great digital capture tool up front, it's going to automate that process. Once that data is in there, now you have a whole host of value that you can add, whether it's moving it through an automated process so that nobody really has to touch it, have predetermined approvals that can be applied to various payments with overrides as needed. And now your staff, both the AP folks as well as the treasury folks, are able to look at the analytics of, okay, what do I have in my queue for payables? What are my cash needs that I have by the end of the week? How much cross-border payments do I need to worry about? Do I need to hedge against FX rates that are going to be flying all over the place because of what's going on in the markets and the economy? And now that those resources are really adding value by just managing and analyzing the data rather than touching it and inputting it. And that's really what the goal is. That's what technology brings to the table, and the value that.
Yeah. Cheryl, when we talk about this idea of how automated organizations are, it might be tempting for some of the attendees to think, well, I send wires for my cross-border payments. Surely that's automated. What are the problems with that thinking, Cheryl?
One of the things that comes to mind is that there are other payment optionalities apart from a wire. So what we look at is actually delivering low direct to bank deposits so that your supplier receives full value. The cost of sending a wire is not just your bank charging you a wire fee, but the receiving bank or the incoming bank also charging a wire fee for an incoming wire fee, but also the potential hops that a wire makes to land in the vendor's bank account. And that's the challenge. And to compound to that, on your slide here is high FX costs.
Yeah.
What happens when you've manually entered banking information that's incorrect and it comes back and your bank has already forced converted it? So for instance, let's take an example. You've entered an invalid GBP or UK IBAN.
Yep.
It comes back. your bank has converted it back to US dollars. You've already, you've been subjected to anywhere from 2% to 5% of FX loss, which you then have to repurchase the GBP because you've corrected the IBAN and resend it to your vendor. So those are the hidden, I believe, costs in foreign exchange in cross-border payments when you are operating manually.
And
Steve
one of the
just,
things I'd like
what?
to add, Mark, is that, when we talk about automation, one of the benefits of having all that data and information, especially when you're getting into cross-border payments, is that view that you have in your cash flow needs allows you to really optimize your payments and how you want to pay rather than last minute. I need to get a wire out to France by Friday. When you have that insight as to, I know that I have, funds that need to move to France on Friday. I have alternatives and options that I can deploy. So I'm not hamstringing myself with those, last minute costs and risks that come with having to do that, via a wire on the day that it's due.
Yeah, Cheryl, Steve described this touch-free processing in approving invoices. Is that kind of nirvana possible when it comes to cross-border payments? You in the scenario you described, just how touch-free is that for an AP department?
I think it can, I think we can reach that status, but by leveraging technology and the tools. So when I look at a transaction itself, I break it down into a pre-transaction, the transaction itself, and post-transaction. Pre-transaction is leveraging technology to validate all the banking information, right? Is leveraging, IBAN validation tools to use bank search tools to validate that we have the right SWIFT code so that we can actually land the payment accurately. So it's when we get it right from the beginning, the chances of us landing a payment on time every time is so much higher.
That's right. You're not only affecting more streamlined process, you're eliminating all the back end inefficiencies that most organizations face, especially if they're paying their suppliers with paper checks. The statistics are staggering at just how expensive it is to pay a supplier with a paper check. And as Cheryl said, it's high costs associated with wires as well. And in many cases, organizations could be saving a lot of money by moving to electronic payments, but not everybody's convinced that automation is the right approach, even though we showed you those statistics earlier that 71% of organizations are automating. That's not to say everybody's on board just yet. Some organizations say they don't have the capital budget for automation. Some complain that they don't have enough IT resources. There's too many competing projects, they say. Others, they'll tell you, well, it's confusing. There's too many technologies, too many vendors, too many approaches to automation. Others are fearful about what change is going to mean to their organization. What will my people think? And some organizations say there's too many distractions going on right now. Well, today you can't afford to be distracted. Steve, a lot of these objections, if you will, to automation really don't hold water in today's automated environment, do they? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, they certainly were challenges years before, but we've entered into a realm where cloud deployed solutions that are fully encompassed from end to end to process these types of transactions are out there and available. And are alternatives, and they range from the simple to the extremely complex for enterprise global level solutions. But most of those solutions are going to be very configurable to meet the specific needs of every organization that's trying to use it. So, understanding what your goals are and how you want to, try to, attack that, the options are there. They can be overwhelming at times. So some of that needs to be thought out. A good partner will help you do that. But, IT resources and, even budget items, as expensive as automation can be, cost benefit analysis are, clearly can prove out very quick return on investment, to make these decisions a no-brainer to move into the next century and to really empower your organization and the people that are running it to be much more effective and efficient and add value to you and your shareholders.
When I think about these objections, Cheryl, when it comes to cross-border payments, I reckon the typical AP leader would find it all overwhelming, right? Dealing with multiple geographies and rules and regulations, banks and currencies. Does this really speak to the importance of finding a partner who can handle that all for you? You don't want to go that alone, do you?
You definitely don't want to go at it alone. I think you want to find a partner that can facilitate all your domestic and your cross-border requirements. There is nothing, I think, more inefficient than having to process your payments with different providers, leaving their
Yeah.
platform, logging in. So imagine a multinational that is a US parent logging into, let's say, a Bank of America, but then in Singapore, you're logging into a DBS bank. And then in France, you're logging into a Barclays a bank account. So
I
how
just want to
inefficient
hide
is
under
that?
my desk, Cheryl.
Yep, for sure. So I think, not only, you want to work with a partner that can service all of your payment needs and process those payments efficiently, but also visibility over each of your entities is really helpful in reaching, a true automation.
As Steve and Cheryl said, today's automated solutions from leading providers have a compelling ROI. They don't disrupt your existing processes. They don't require burdensome IT resources. They use advanced technologies that engage and not just enable your staff. And all of that frees up your staff's time so that they're no longer distracted. They're focused solely on strategic activities. They only have to intervene when absolutely necessary. And this creates an environment where you're not only going to achieve tremendous cost savings, 84% or more on average, according to statistics from IOFM, but now you're going to be able to really affect strategic benefits. And one of those big strategic benefits is stronger supplier relationships. If there's one lesson we've learned over the past 2 years, it's that supplier relationships matter. Look at all the challenges organizations are facing with supply chain disruption. And now we understand why it's so important to ensure we can process invoices and pay suppliers in a timely manner. What is it, Steve, that suppliers like most about AP automation?
Money. They get paid quicker. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, one of the big hurdles that we saw the past 2 years was, literally old processing and payment methods caused late and or non-payments to vendors, which just was completely disruptive to your relationship, to your supply chain, etc. So even vendors that historically said, look, I just want a check, they buckled and said, okay, I'll take whatever electronic payment method you can give me, can get paid. And as we see in the world today, the supply chain continues to be somewhat strained, and the ability to communicate with your vendors, give them updates on what's going on. Technology is helpful there via vendor portals, where they can log in and see exactly what's going on with invoices they submitted, when the payment date's going to be. If they need cash flow help, they can reach out and say, hey, I'm willing to give you a 2% discount if you can pay me a week earlier. There's lots of financing and cash management opportunities when you have that rapport with the clients, because now you have an automated process that gives visibility into the whole supply chain.
Cheryl, how do global suppliers benefit from automating cross-border payments?
Just to piggyback on what Steve said, automation to me also means more transparency, leveraging technology like the likes of GPI that can tell you every step of the way when the estimated delivery date of that payment, why it's delayed, or when a vendor is claiming, we billed you for $100,000, we only received 999, 500. Where is that delta? What is that difference? The technology can pinpoint at each hop of that particular payment what was deducted, so that you can improve your supplier relationship and provide that transparency to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone wants better visibility into what's going on with their cash and spending these days. And that's one of the big challenges with non-electronic payments. You simply don't know where things stand. Best-in-class organizations, well, they get all of this. And in many cases, they've already done all of this. What we find is when we look at the things that separate best-in-class AP organizations versus their peers, we find that two of the things, one, of course, being their ability to make electronic payments, and the second, the ability to deliver that rich remittance data, that visibility that Cheryl was just talking about. These are the things that they've implemented in their organizations. And as a result of that, well, now they're able to affect some of those inefficiencies in the invoice processing and payments lifecycle. And that in many cases starts with reducing their costs. 74% of ACH transactions cost less than 75 cents. Good luck trying to generate a check payment for that type of cost. And 65% of V-card transactions cost less than $1.99. And here again, with a paper check, not only is it going to cost more, there's no opportunity for you to earn cash back rebates. You're also able to achieve greater efficiency when you automate your AP process end to end. Now you're able to create an optimized, highly efficient environment where you accelerate your life cycle, where you accelerate your invoice approvals. You're able to avoid those late payments, capture more early payment discount opportunities, maybe seize upon supply chain financing opportunities for your suppliers. You're able to reduce those calls and emails from suppliers, better forecast your cash. And as Steve just said, you're going to avoid potential supply chain options. And once you've created that electronic framework that you're going to build all this upon, now you're able to leverage new technologies as they become available. The types of invoice processing technologies that ActiveWorx talks about, and some of those electronic payment methods that Cheryl was talking about. So, Steve, when we look at the traditional payment models, well, we find out that there's lots of inefficiency all across the life cycle with domestic payments. But Cheryl, you were talking about some of the international inefficiencies too. Steve, maybe I'll let you take the first stab at domestic payments and where some of that friction lies in your opinion.
There certainly is lots of opportunities for efficiencies in the domestic payment world. The first one, as we've been hitting on, is just moving to electronic payment methods. And when you work with the partner banks that organizations have, typically there's going to be a treasury function involved. The more insight you have in your cash flow needs, the more that you know how you're going to pay, who you're going to pay, and what you're going to pay, the more opportunity you have to manage that cash flow, either internally within the organization or in conjunction with the treasury departments at your bank. And that's for simple USD payments from one business to another business within the United States. As we move into the global market, where we have hundreds and hundreds of banks and hundreds of different currencies, etc., Cheryl certainly can expound on where the complexities just become exponentially higher there.
Yeah, Cheryl, where is the biggest point of friction when it comes to cross-border payments using a traditional model?
I think the traditional model, I think the friction is liquidity. As I mentioned earlier, your regional bank is not going to have that liquidity to, source that Thai baht or that Philippine peso, nor will they have a direct relationship with, in Thailand or the Philippines to deliver direct to bank. So you're going to have a delay in payment. Are they also collecting the necessary regulatory rules? For an example, with India, is your regional bank collecting the IFSC code to deliver INR successfully because your vendor is, expecting payment to release the container of goods? And then when you're looking at foreign exchange costs itself, you want to go direct to the source as much as possible. A regional bank, as I mentioned, is not going to source that liquidity directly, right? So you then have an extra added layer of costs to that FX transaction.
Yeah. So what you end up with in the traditional payments model are high wire fees, less transparency, more touch points, limited service, and not a whole lot of innovation. And so what's the way we should be doing this, Cheryl? What's the nirvana we should be looking for?
I think the nirvana, in my mind, as I look at, technology that's out there in the marketplaces, how can, right now, I think, when I look at our client base, they're lean and mean because of COVID, and what they want is to be able to have a partner that can actually, if they choose, to hedge at the invoice level. Because right now, organizations don't have that visibility, nor the budget to, engage with a treasury system to provide that visibility. They want to hedge at the invoice level to minimize the foreign exchange slippage. So for instance, if we look at an invoice, dated January 1st with a 60-day payment date, the euro US dollar rate on Jan 1st versus March 1st when you have to make the payment is not the same because
Right.
FX markets are live 24/5. How do you account for that potential foreign exchange loss or gain on your financials? So
Yeah.
that's where we're looking at to improve efficiencies for clients overall.
And you simply can't do that in a traditional model, can you? I mean, as good as you are at it, you'll never get there, will you? You'll always have this slippage.
But there's also a disconnect because typically it's the treasury team that's handling all these large hedges, not the AP clerk or the AP team that is making these payments, right?
Hmm.
So how are they communicating through a system that can help them minimize the foreign exchange volatility? And you'll see here on this slide that you've shown is the average three-day change on a select currency pair. When you look at majors of US dollar and euro, the average three-day change is 1.2%. But when you're looking at a larger three-day change, it's 3.5%. But when you look at the Mexican peso, which is just south of the border, the largest three-day change is 11% on a $10,000 invoice. That's costing the organization 1,096. And then when you factor that by X amount, that could be an astronomical cost that you're not that's not being realized.
Now, Steve, somebody might be listening in on this and saying, yeah, these are great points, Cheryl, but this ain't my problem in accounts payable. This is Treasury's problem or cash management's problem. The CFO's somebody else's problem. But this really does speak to the importance of having an end-to-end approach to AP automation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And again, we keep going back to the point of transparency, and being able to see, a full view into the data that's required. And, the goal really is to make the organization more efficient, more effective, less costly to run. And automation from the capture piece, which somebody can say, that's the mailroom, to the processing piece, which is AP, to the payment piece, which is treasury. If you really want it to make your organization, more efficient, you need to look at that holistically and say, we need that automation from end to end, from beginning to end, with everyone having it going on the entire process through there, not only internally, but externally as well with your vendors.
Are you arguing, Steve, that you will never achieve optimal results from your supplier payments if you don't automate the front end processes, get at that data that feeds those payments?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole point of optimization is to most effectively pay your supply chain vendors in a manner that's least disruptive to you to process it and least costly to you to pay it. And the only way to really do that is to capture that data and to have that transparency into, who to pay, how to pay, and when to pay, so you can manage that from a cash flow perspective for your organization.
Earlier, we asked our attendees to describe their level of automation in their accounts payable department. To no surprise, Steve, none of our attendees today said they're fully automated, but On the good side of the ledger, none of our attendees also said they're completely manual, paper-based. Everyone on the line today is either partially or largely automated. Now, let's find out, Steve and Cheryl, how it is their level of automation is when it comes to payments. This time we want to know what percentage of your payments to suppliers are made electronically. Less than half of your payments to suppliers are electronic. 50% to 74% of your payments to suppliers are electronic. 75 to 99% of your payments to suppliers are made electronically, or all of them. You're living the touch-free electronic dream that Cheryl wishes for you. Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed in your screen, and we're going to discuss the results in just a moment. Cheryl, how much progress have businesses made in electronifying their payments to suppliers over the past 2 years?
I think I can only speak in terms of cross-border payments, Mark, and I think they have made great progress. And the reason for that is that, when you think about the European Union and the UK, where they're phasing out checks, if not they have already have,
Yeah.
US organizations just don't have that choice. In North America, they love that check. They love that float apparently that still exists, right? They want to be able to stand in line to deposit that check. So I think, when I look from a cross-border perspective, from the clients that I have and the partners that I have, more and more, if not all of them, actually, make payments electronically
Yeah.
in
And I,
one way or
and
another.
I would add domestically, Cheryl, that, where we saw 25 to 35%, electronic payments, a couple of 3 years ago, it's well above 75% now for the clients that we're exposed to, and trending higher every day. I mean, and some clients really, have minimal checks. So, although it's still out there, and I agree with you, and there's some suppliers that just demand a check because they don't want to, deal with electronic payments. The trend really has been overwhelmingly a move. For all the reasons we know that people just aren't around to pick up a check, go to a bank and deposit it.
Well, you two have a lot of work to do with the attendees of today's webinar. Most of our attendees today are making most of their payments to suppliers electronically. So talk to me about the future state. Talk to me about Nirvana, Cheryl. What should we be doing when it comes to cross-border payments?
I think, as we mentioned earlier, and Steve can certainly touch on it from a domestic perspective, for us, cross-border is that visibility and that transparency of every step of the payment. And, how do we programmatically display that or make that visible to the clients so that when a vendor contacts them, they know exactly where the payment is at, instead of having to write an email to the bank and waiting for the bank's response, which who knows how long that will take, right? And then obviously increase payment speeds. We want to deliver a payment as quickly as possible for full value, leveraging the SWIFT network or other payment rails.
Yeah. So what does the AP department of the future look like, Steve, in your mind?
Well, I think it's certainly going to be leaner and meaner, to use Cheryl's terms, with everything that's happened. Historically, companies, it was easy to throw body, at a backlog and, an inefficiency, and, the cost was relatively insignificant. We just don't have that luxury anymore. We need to automate. I had mentioned earlier that, the vendor portal really was a critical component of initiating this straight through end-to-end automation process. And I still believe that's going to be critical as well. There are a lot of vendors that are reluctant to go and upload invoices to all of their customers' portals, and but those are waning. There's organizations out there that demand, if you want to get paid, you're going to use our portal. Our time, the vendors are going to know exactly what they've delivered to be paid on. The companies are going to be able to match that against POs that are out there automatically to make sure that there's nothing that's breaking between the invoice and the PO.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations are going to be able to plan and schedule their payments based upon due dates, discounts, other arrangements that they're making with the vendors. The vendors are going to, log into the portal and not have to send emails and phone calls to say, where is the status of my my invoice being approved, and when should I expect payment? So that will become the way of AP processing, and it will affect the entire supply chain, from start to finish. And I think everyone is just, they're moving there, and that's just, that's going to speed up as we move ahead.
And one of the things that'll happen in that vision that Steve just described, Cheryl, is that we'll have an environment where we have greater control over things. Talk to me about that, how it is that automating this AP process and cross-border payments in particular provides me with better tracking and control.
I think it provides you with better tracking and control because, as Steve mentioned, if the vendor is providing the right robust data that is needed to land a payment, it's going to eliminate a lot of the post-transactional queries about, where is my payment? Well, you know what? Through Swift GPI, we can provide you that transparency. If it's using another local rail, we're able to show you where that payment has landed. And right now, I think when we look at incompatible payments as well, is the onus is on the vendor to input the right data.
Right.
When it's not the right data, obviously the propensity for a rejected payment is much higher. So let's take an example of, a bank account in India. The likelihood of a bank account in India being a currency other than US dollars or INR is highly unlikely. If we were to input GBP there, it's going to be force converted or it's going to be rejected. And again, you're missing your payment deadline, right?
Yeah.
So it is so important that we collect the right data upfront through technology or, a shared responsibility between the vendor and the client, right? So I think as we evolve and as technology evolves, there will be different mechanisms to, enhance the current process.
Absolutely. And these are some of the reasons that organizations are automating their payments to suppliers, both domestically and internationally. And what's going to help accelerate this is the growth of real-time payments. So now we're going to have the ability to not only electronify our payments, but accelerate them as well and have them carry rich remittance data that can make it easier for suppliers to update their AR processes. This will create an environment where now we have frictionless processing of invoices and payments to suppliers. Well, one of the things you might be wondering is, how do I go about starting this? How do I start doing the types of things that Cheryl and Steve talked about today? Well, to give us some starting points, I'm going to hand it to Steve to tell you more about ActiveWorx.
Thanks, Mark. And ActiveWorx has been building out these capabilities of automating processes for years. Our core functionality really is about that digital data capture and eliminating a lot of the manual error-prone processes up front, and really automating that through to ready to pay. In conjunction with Corpay and Cheryl and her colleagues, handing invoices off through our payments hub, to be able to dynamically manage those payments in cash, and processes, is critical to the straight through, end-to-end automation. You layer on top of that the things we've been talking about all day, with enhanced vendor management through portals and self-service, and even on the other side with eliminating paper invoices going out via electronic invoice present. The full scope of technology and processes wrapped around the AR and AP functions and all the cash flow, sources and uses that you have, it gives you that one-stop view and transparency into everything that's going on, and it allows management to better, manage the business, react to things that are going on in the world, and better enhance the value that they're bringing to the organization.
Yeah. We're now going to enter the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already submitted your questions for Cheryl and Steve, or if you've thought of more questions for Cheryl and Steve, go ahead, use the chat tool on your screen to submit your questions to me. We'll ask as many questions as time allows. Our first question from an attendee, Steve, is for you. They want to know any tips for selling AP automation to our senior management?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you remember from some of the earlier comments we made around, perceived, lack of capital budget and IT resources, the quickest way really is to focus on the ROI that are highlighted in, much of the industry information that we bring to the table. There's 85+% efficiency can be gained, which translates into direct cost reduction and process efficiency within that organization. Typically finance guys are numbers driven. It's nice that people aren't, working 20 hours a day to get invoices, manually posted in there, but when you look at the economic impact and benefit of automation from a cost perspective, from return on the investment of implementing that technology, and then on top of that, from a cash perspective of what you're able to and either discounts with your suppliers, potential rebate revenues with alternative payment methodologies, better hedging through the FX markets, by going through, cross-border payment partner, all of those are definable economic benefits to the bottom line that are pretty easily defined, through an analysis. And so I would encourage anybody that, knows that they want to do it, but they need that, financial, proof of why it's worth it. Let us look at those numbers and crunch them for you, and let you know, what you can bring to the table to benefit an organization.
Cheryl, same question to you. What would be the thing that captures the fancy of senior management the most when it comes to automating cross-border payments?
I think, as Steve pointed out, is that savings on foreign exchange. The question I would have for our attendees is, do you know the FX margins being charged by your current banking partner today? And if not, for us to run that analysis, right? So that we know, what that margin is, what that potential savings is by automating, and perhaps, the savings that we bring to the table can subsidize the overall program of automating your AP department.
Another question for you, Cheryl, from an attendee. They want to know, how are payments reconciled in your solution?
So we would work with the likes of ActiveWorx for payment reconciliation. So we do provide reconciliation files that provides, the FX rate, who you've paid, the payment reference, that can be routed through back to the ERP or through a platform such like ActiveWorx, so that they can close that loop on that particular payment in the GL.
Steve, a question for you. One of our attendees wants to know whether ActiveWorx offers a supply chain financing capability as part of its solution. That plays right into this payments discussion, doesn't it?
It does. And, the payments market continues to evolve, as we've discussed. And yes, we do have supply chain financing options for our clients. It is a very unique option, a little different than, some of the other electronic payments. It offers a lot more flexibility from a cash management perspective, to take advantage of those networks out there to keep your vendors happy and keep your balance sheet happy at the same time.
And that will be our final word. Steve, Cheryl, thanks so much for an excellent presentation today and for sharing your insights with us. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join us. On behalf of ActiveWorx, this is Mark Brousseau. Hope to speak with you all again soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.